talk about Dhurandhar Part 1, the first thing that comes up isn't Ranveer Singh action sequences. It's actually Khanna walking to a Bahraini rap track called Fasla and doing a dance step that nobody wrote into the script. That move was a complete on-set improvisation. The original script just had Rahman the Kid walk in, vibe to the music, and sit down. Akshay Khanna decided to do something different on the day. And that spontaneous decision became the single most viral moment of the entire film, which is interesting because think about what that tells you. You have Ranveer Singh, one of Bollywood's biggest star, playing the lead, and the scene that broke the internet wasn't his. It belonged to the villain who improvised it on the spot. And here's the thing, that's not a flaw. That's the film working exactly as intended. Because Durandar Part 1 is a film that constantly lets the wrong person take the room. Hamza stays in the shadows. Rahman the Kid commands every space he enters. The hero is deliberately invisible. The villain is deliberately electric. That tension between who the audience is watching and who the film is actually about is what makes part 1 genuinely interesting. And is also where the music comes in because that first love moment doesn't just work because of Akshay Khanna's performance. It works because the film give it the perfect sonic identity. The music in these films deserve its own conversation, but we will get there. First, let me just tell you what this video actually is. No hype, no agenda, just me working through both paths. What they get right, what they sacrifice, and what these two films together are saying about where Bollywood is right now. Before anything else, that post. Six individual black and white portraits, shot separately, each face filling its own frame, same serious expression, no names, no title, just faces. Top row Sanjay Dutt, Ranveer Singh, R. Madhavan. Bottom row Akshay Khanna, Aditya Dhar, the director in the center, and Arjun Rampal. Ranveer posted it in July 2024 with no warning, just dropped it, and it went viral immediately. And the reason it went viral wasn't just the cast, it was their sixth face, the director, right there in the middle of the bottom row, style exactly like his actors. That's a statement. That's a director saying, this film belongs to me as much as it belongs to anyone on this poster. This isn't a star vehicle, this is an obsession. And that framing turned out to be completely accurate. But what got me even before that was those five actors, because all of them are genuinely talented, properly talented, and most of them have spent years in Bollywood being underused, wrong roles, wrong timing, the industry moving around them without knowing what to do with what they had. So, a film that puts all five in the same room with the director confident enough to put his own face on the poster, I wanted to see that. Why it works. So, Ranveer plays Hamza, an Indian intelligence operative who spent years buried inside Karachi's criminal ecosystem. And the film basically drops you into his world and just lets it breathe. There's no rush. The first hour is world building, the gang hierarchies, the drug roads, the politics bleeding into the crime, the way ISI handlers move through that world like they belong there. And I know some people found that slow, but for me, that patient is exactly what makes the film work. Because by the time things start moving, you actually understand the world these people are living in. It doesn't feel constructed for the camera. It feels like it existed before the film started. Part 1 mostly does that, and that's rare. The cast. Ranveer first. Look, I have been a fan of Ranveer as an actor for a long time. Lutera, Padmavat, Gully Boy. When he's logged in, there's nobody quite like him in Bollywood. But then celebrity brand got bigger than the actor for a while. The ads, the outfits, the constant presence everywhere. At some point, you stopped seeing the performer and just saw the persona. This film strips all of that away. He's restrained here in a way I haven't seen from him in years. And it reminded me of exactly why people were so excited about him in the first place. Akshay Khanna honestly might be my favorite thing in the film. Here's the thing about Akshay, he doesn't perform for the camera, he just exists in the scene. There's no moment where you catch him acting. And in a film full of big, loud performances, that kind of stillness stands out completely. His scenes have this quiet menace that's hard to write and even harder to pull off. He pulls it off every single time. Arjun Rampal. He came from modeling background, and when he made his debut in 2001, the assumption was good-looking guy, probably can't act, but he surprised people. Got a Filmfare nomination, critics noticed him, and then the film just didn't work. For almost half a decade, lead role after lead role quietly disappeared. Dil Ka Rishta, Asambhav, Wada Yakeen. You probably don't even remember most of them. But here's the thing, the presence was always there. Every single time the man walks into the frame and the camera just responded to him. That's not something you can teach. The industry figured that out eventually, just not in the way he probably wanted. Dawn, Om Shanti Om, Rock On, great performances, national awards, genuine recognitions, but always in someone else's story. Dhurandhar finally gives him that weight again, and he delivers completely. Madhavan, this one's personal. His film breakthrough came in 2000 with Alai Payude, Mani Ratnam's romantic drama, won the Filmfare Best Male Debut South, and then what followed was genuinely special. Minnale with Gautam Menon, Kannathil Muttamittal back with Maniratnam, Anbe Sivam alongside Kamal Hassan. In that early to mid 2000 window, Madhavan had something specific going in Tamil cinema. Films that didn't ask him to be a traditional hero, just a real complicated person. And the audience felt that. But here's what actually happened, and this is where most people get these stories slightly wrong. He didn't just switch to Bollywood, he was doing both industries simultaneously from almost the beginning. Rehna Hai Tere Dil Mein in 2001, then Rang De Basanti, Guru, Three Idiots. But in Hindi films, he was always in someone else's story, supporting Amir Khan, supporting Abhishek Bachchan, never the center. And splitting attention between two industries without fully committing to either started catching up with him. He himself admitted to taking a 4 year break mid career because he was, in his own words, disillusionist with work. Not happy with what he was doing or getting. The comeback was strong. Irudi Sutra and then Vikram Veda alongside Vijay Sethupathi. Then Rocketry, which he also directed and won the National Award for. More selective, more purposeful. Watching him in Duranda, that same quality is still completely intact. The intelligence behind the eyes, the way internal states move across his face so quietly you almost miss them. He doesn't have tons of screen time, but every scene he is in lands. Sanjay Dutt, he is good. He's reliably Sanjay Dutt. The film doesn't quite escape the trap of putting him in a role adjacent to things he's played before. But within those limits, he does what he does. And then there's this one scene that completely changes the mood of the film. Not because it's loud, not because of the action, but because of how disturbingly real it feels. Hamza is just standing there in that control room, surrounded by everyone watching the television screen in silence. And on that screen, Mumbai is under attack 2611. People running, gunshots, chaos everywhere. And for the first time in the film, you can actually feel the weight of everything crashing down on him. Because this isn't just another operation anymore. This is his country, his people, and the most painful part is he can't do anything. He is forced to stand there and watch. And somewhere deep inside, he knows he helped build this monster. The same man who once delivered the guns is now watching what those guns are doing to innocent people. Ranveer Singh's face in that moment, no dialogues, no dramatic screaming, just guilt, pure guilt. Honestly, I think that's one of the strongest acting moments in the entire film. And then the film hits you with a flashback. Hamza standing back in his village, his mother looking at him, not with anger, but with disappointment, like she already knows, like a mother silently understanding that her son has crossed the line he can never come back from. That look stayed with me. But then the scene becomes even more terrifying because suddenly the screen turns red. The background music almost disappears, and all you hear is the handler's voice, cold, calm, and emotionless. The handler instructing the attackers keep shooting, keep moving, kill whoever comes in the way. And that whole sequence honestly becomes difficult to sit through. Not because the film is trying to shock you with visuals, but because somewhere you remember these things. Kandahar episode, the parliament attack. Honestly, I only know those through the news recaps, the documentaries, the way certain events get replayed on television years later, and you piece together what actually happened through those fragments. It was more like background noise that slowly become history. But 2611 I actually watched unfold live on the news for days. And that's a completely different kind of memory because you weren't reading about it later or watching a reconstruction. You were sitting in front of a television screen watching it happen. The Taj, Nariman house, the casualty members updating in real time. and not fully knowing how it was going to end. That doesn't leave you. So when Dhurandhar builds an entire world around the machinery that made that night possible, and then forces you to watch it through the eyes of a man who was inside that machinery, it stops feeling like cinema for a moment. It just pulls you back. And that's exactly what I mean when I say this film earns that sequence. But here's what actually got me, something most people watch straight past. Hamza didn't knowingly arm the attackers. He delivered those weapons without knowing what they were for. He was used, completely blindsided. And the moment he realized what was coming, he tried to warn India. He got the intelligence out. He did what a spy is supposed to do, but India still couldn't stop it. Whether that was sabotage from the inside, or a warning that came too late, or intelligence that wasn't acted on seriously enough, the film leaves that weight sitting with you without fully explaining it. And somehow that ambiguity makes it worse because there's no clean answer for Hamza to hold on to either. He didn't choose this, he was operated around and he still couldn't stop it. That's not guilt from making a wrong choice. That's something much heavier. Watching a catastrophe unfold that you try to prevent, built on a betrayal you never saw coming. And that's exactly why that scene hits so hard because Ranveer isn't playing a man who failed. He's playing a man who did everything right and still had to stand there and watch. The music. One thing I genuinely don't think enough people are talking about with Durandar is a soundtrack. And I don't mean that casually. I mean, I don't remember the last time I loved almost an entire album from a single film like this. Composer Shashwat Sachdev did something specific here that most Bollywood soundtrack don't bother doing. Instead of just taking old songs and slapping electronic beats on top, which is what most remixes do and why most people hate them, he actually went deep into the originals and rebuilt them from the inside. The title track samples a 1995 Punjabi song called Na Dil De Pardesi No by Mohammad Sadiq and Ranjit Kaur. Ishq Jalakar is a remake of a 1960 Qawwali, Na To Karwan Ki Talash Hai, originally sung by Mohammad Rafi. Run Down the City Flips and R.D. Burman and Asha Bhosle Trank from 1971. Songs from the 1960s, 70s, and 90s all pulled into a dark, politically charged spy thriller and somehow fitting perfectly. And that's what makes it rare because they didn't modernize these songs by destroying what made them work in the first place. The emotional identity of the originals is still there, the soul is still there. It just got placed into a completely different world and made more powerful by the contrast. Ishq Jalkar actually got released early because public demand was so high after it appeared in the trailer. A 65-year-old Qawwali songs viral in the 2025. That tells you everything about how well this was done. Part 2 continues the same approach. Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan's Dil Pe Zakham Kate Hai, more classics from the 90s. Both films have genuinely strong music, but personally, Part 1 soundtrack stayed with me longer. Something about the mood, the placement, the way certain tracks land inside specific emotional moments. Because in these films, the music isn't just there to sound good between scenes, it behaves like memory, like nostalgia, being used as a storytelling devices, like emotional glue holding together different timeline, different characters, different decades all at once. And for me, that became one of the most underrated strength of both films. Something I kept thinking about while watching part 2, and this came up a lot in discussions online, is how many people assumed the sequel was greenlit after part 1 became a hit. Like the usual Bollywood logic, film works, sequel gets announced, production starts. That's not what happened here. Both parts were shot simultaneously, one continuous shot July 2024 all the way through October 2025 in India and Thailand. And the film was originally conceived as a single story. The decision to split it into two parts only happened in post production, when Aditya Dhar realized that the full cut simply is too large to release as one film, which honestly explains so much. It explains why part 1 feels like pure setup and world building because it literally is. It explains why certain character threads feel unfinished, hanging in a way that feels deliberate rather than incomplete. And it explains that seamless visual continuity between both parts that would have been almost impossible to achieve if part 2 was built separately. This wasn't a sequel, it was always one massive film that got divided. And once you understand that, you also start to notice something else, something slightly more complicated, because the deeper you look into the real events that inspire these films, the more you notice how much the timeline has been compressed and rearranged. Kandahar was 1999, the parliament attack was 2001, 2611 was 2008. Nearly a decade separate incidents, separate operations, separate people, all stitched together into one narrative around Hamza. And I want to be clear, I'm not saying the film lied. I'm saying it does what political thrillers always do. It compresses years into months. It connects dots that may have been connected differently in reality. It takes the emotional truth of real events and builds a cinematic architecture around them that's cleaner and more purposeful than real life ever actually is. That's filmmaking. That's always been filmmaking. But inspired by true events, covers a lot of ground. And the honest thing to say is the further you get from the real history, the more Dhurandhar starts to feel less like a document and more like an argument, which isn't automatically a bad thing, but it's worth knowing which one you're watching. Okay, part two. And look, I want to be fair here. It's not a bad film. The scale is real. Ranveer keeps doing great work. The ambition is genuinely there. But my honest problem with part two is how repetitive it starts to feel after a while. Because there's a pattern that keeps repeating. Hamza identifies a target, the person gets taken down, it makes the news as an unknown killing, then the next target, then the next, and after a while, you start to feel the rhythm too clearly. And once you feel the rhythm, the tension disappears. Part 1 kept you guessing because Hamza was always one wrong move away from exposure. The danger felt real and close. In part 2, he moves through these takedowns a little too smoothly, a little too cleanly. The obstacles don't feel like they're pushing back hard enough. And there's a lot of slow motion, a lot of walking through Layari town, a lot of shots that feel like the film is stretching itself out when it could be moving forward. But, and this is important, part 2 is not just action and targets because when it slows down, it goes personal, it genuinely delivers. The best example of this is the bathroom scene with Pinda. Hamza is hosting a party at his Layari house to keep up the image of a powerful Karachi Don when he suddenly recognizes one of the guests, his childhood friend Pinda, the same man he once trusted to look after his mother and sister. Now Pinda has become a drug smuggler working with Pakistan based cartels. High and furious, Pinda corners Hamza in the bathroom and unloads years of anger about being abandoned, throwing that killer line. घर की याद नहीं आई तुझे जसी? In this drug-induced haze, he even sees Hamza's face distorted into a ghostly corpse-like figure, turning the confrontation briefly into a horror moment. The argument explodes into a violent fight in the cramped bathroom. Hamza is forced to kill the one friend who really knew him just to protect his cover and his mission. Another undercover agent cleans up the scene for him, ready to take the heat if things go wrong. When Hamza comes back, looks at the mess, and says, "Burn everything," it becomes one of Ranveer's strongest moments in the film. In three words, you see grief, exhaustion, and cold professionalism landing together. A man mourning his friend and switching that emotion off in the same breath because the mission leaves him no other choice. When Hamza comes back, looks at the mess, and says, "Burn everything," it becomes one of Ranveer's strongest moments in the film. In three words, you see grief, exhaustion, and cold professionalism land together. A man mourning his friends and switching that emotion off in the same breath because the mission leaves him no other choice. That sequence is the emotional anchor of part two, and it's genuinely great filmmaking. There's also a second emotional anchor. The moment the female lead finally realizes who Hamza actually is, that he's an Indian spy, that the man she loved is partly a carefully constructed mask. The scene plays less like a dramatic twist and more like a slow collapse, quietly devastating in a way that most of part two's louder sequences aren't. I would mention these two moments, Pinda and Yalina, as the heart of part two, one tied to his past, one tied to his present, both showing that underneath the spy fantasy is a man who keeps losing people who matter most to him. The problem is that between these two emotional peaks, there's a lot of filler, the repetitive target sequences, the slow motion, the stretching, and when you have just watched something as raw as the bathroom scene, going back to another news headline assassination feels jarring. There's a fundamental imbalance of part two. The personal moments are exceptional, the operational sequences are where it loses you. Now, Arjun Rampal in part two, I want to be specific about this because I think people get it slightly wrong. His character isn't mishandled exactly, the performance is there. The presence is there, but here's the thing. After Akshay Khanna's Rahman the Kid in part 1, you go into part 2 expecting something at that level because Akshaye's character was so completely built, the charisma, the menace, the way he owned every single scene, that you naturally expect the main villain of part 2 to hit that same height. And Arjun Rampal is good, he really is, but the specific electricity Akshay brought, that unpredictability, that feeling that anything could happen when he was on screen, that's a very hard thing to follow. Both characters are based on real people, so the film can only go so far. But that gap between what you were expecting and what you actually got, that's where the frustration comes from. It's not that part 2 failed, it's that part 1 set a bar that was always going to be extremely difficult to match. The violence. I want to talk about this because it keeps coming up with these films and with Animal Kill Marco, and I think people sometimes have the conversation wrong. Violence in cinema isn't automatically a problem, it is a tool. The question is whether it is being used precisely or just for the rush. Kill. For example, the violence there was structural, it was communicating something specific about what bodies endure, what conflict actually caused, uncomfortable in a way that meant something. Dhurandhar is mostly in that territory, but not always. There are moments in part 2 where it tips into spectacle in a way that part 1, with all its restraint, never really did. I'm not saying tone it down, I'm saying some of those moments felt like they were there because the audience expected them, not because the story needed them. The propaganda question. Let's be honest. Durandar has a clear political position. It makes previous government look weak, presents the Modi era as a decisive and heroic, and uses real event in a way that can feel more persuasive than reflective. That's where the propaganda question comes in, not because political cinema is wrong, but because the film seems comfortable criticizing past power while safely glorifying present power. You can still appreciate the filmmaking, but you don't have to ignore the politics to do that. Final verdict. Part 1, genuinely great. I will rewatch it. The world building, the restraint, the cast, the music, the specific details that reward a second viewing. That's a real craft. Part 2, ambitious, uneven, and ultimately a little less than what Part 1 promised. But when it hits the Pinda bathroom scene, the Yalina reveal, the moment where it slows down and goes personal, it really hits. Part 1 is an 8.5 for me. Part 2 is a 7.5. Absolutely must watch. Bollywood doesn't make things like this often enough. If this video made you think about these films differently, share it with someone who watched Dhurandhar and has opinions. Trust me, that conversation is worth having. Like, subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.